Hello, Neogenians. Welcome to Dawn of the New Earth. Today, we have an extremely important video as we explore your soul signature. I'm going to give you a test that you can take right now to discover what your soul signature actually is. And this isn't just for fun, but it's for practical, real-world purposes, because this soul signature, this unique signature of yours, is going to be key for actualizing your higher self and ultimately being able to manifest the life that you want. So this is incredibly important stuff, and we're going to be using the Tree of Life and Kabbalah to unlock this information and understand it. And this is a very important video because you need to figure out what your key is, what your signature is, because we're going to be using that key, we're going to be using that signature in future videos and future lessons on Kabbalah. So it's a very important stuff. We're going to get started right away. But as always, hey, if you haven't already, become a member. It helps out a lot. You get access to my downloads on inner transformation in PDF form. I have a whole bunch of them on alchemy right now. And I'm going to be putting these Kabbalah lessons as well in downloadable form so that you can be able to access them in easy to read format with all the diagrams anytime that you would like. That's going to be real helpful. And we're also having a members only video right after this called "The Bible Has a Huge Problem and Christians Are Ignoring It." So become a member. It helps out a lot. Also, if you haven't already, check out my books. If you enjoy what we talk about in terms of Kabbalah, check out Psychogenesis. This is not about Kabbalah, but it's all about inner star actualization. And you're going to hear a lot of the concepts that we talk about in Kabbalah, like the shadow self, the mirror self, the power self, the ego, the inner star, are all discussed in here, along with hyper awareness and will forming, which is basically understanding how to harness the power of manifestation in a rational and organized way. Let's see, anything else? Follow me on Spotify. Link is in the description of the video. Links for all the things that I mentioned and more are in the description of this video. Okay, so let's get started right away. Last week, what did we discuss? Last week, we talked about the Tree of Life in terms of the inner star model. And to just give you a quick rundown of what that looked like, I'll show you right now. So this is the Tree of Life as traditionally understood with the 10 Sefirot, and we've gone through this. And by the way, if you don't really know, if this is your first video, if you don't know what the Tree of Life is and you don't know what the inner star model is, you don't really have to, don't worry. You can still get the gist of what's going on here. It will be helpful, but it's not completely necessary. And there's a whole playlist on Kabbalah if you want a breakdown on all those things. So this is what we took a look. So last week we took a look at translating the Tree of Life into the inner star model. And so this is the inner star model. And if you don't, you don't need to have all this memorized or anything, but I just want you to recall where we left off last time. We took the structure of the Tree of Life and then overlaid the Neogenian inner star system over it to draw out different correspondences and understand what's happening. Now, the reason why I'm explaining this is because this is going to be part of this soul test that we're going to take in a minute. Now, before we get into that, we have to understand why we're doing this. Because why the hell else would you waste your time with this stuff if there's not a purpose to it? So on that note, I want to explain something about this inner star model. So if you'll notice, and in the Neogenian system and inner star actualization, what is key are the different structures of the unconscious mind. The shadow self, the mirror self, the power self, and of course the inner star. Now you'll notice that we have those represented here. It may be a little small and hard to see, but down here we have the shadow self. The shadow self is located in Yesod. And the power self is up here, associated with Chokhmah. And then the mirror self are both of these, represented by both of these, because the mirror self is your inner opposite. And so here we have the archetypal opposites expressed here. And then, of course, at the very top, we have the inner star. So why am I explaining this? Why does this matter? Because what I want you to understand is that even though we locate the inner star up here, let me show you a blank one. Okay. So even though the inner star is represented on the tree of life here at the top, the inner star, though, is actually not just the top, but the entire tree. Okay, so what I'm trying to make clear is that we may simplistically represent or associate different archetypes or complexes with certain sefirot, but they're going to have a more detailed influence. So in our example, the inner star is represented at Keter, but it's actually the entire tree, because the inner star is your higher self, and the higher self is the totality of your psyche. It is the totality of your psyche. Everything, all the archetypes, all the complexes within the unconscious, the collective, that's all within you as the higher self. All right. So it is, though we locate it here, it's actually the entire tree, because it's the entirety of your psyche. And you can see everything unfolds from the inner star. So it's all, you can think of it, it all was enfolded in here. So what I want to do first, okay, is remember that this is the entire tree is the inner star, but we associate Keter with the inner star. So remember, this aspect is the ego. And up here, we have the inner star. Though the entire thing is the inner star, we associate the inner star with the topmost sefirot of Keter, and the ego we associate with the sefirot of Tiferet, or Tiferet. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because this path, this connection between the ego and the higher self, or the inner star, is incredibly important. This is what's known as the ego inner star axis. This is the ego inner star axis. Axis as in AXIS, not access, but axis. So this represents your ego's connection to the inner star. That's what that represents. And the whole, well, one of the major goals here, and if you're wondering, like, why are we talking about this? Let's get to the test. You'll see why this is important in a minute, because we need to know what we're doing. This ego and its connected path, the ego inner star axis, is key, because what that means, when you strengthen that axis, it is making sure that your ego is in line with your higher self. Because typically speaking, for those who have not forged a strong connection to their higher self, the ego and the inner star are often at odds with each other because they have different functions. The inner star, the function of the inner star, is to bring your psyche to unity, to wholeness. That is the function of the inner star. It is attempting to move you towards wholeness and unity. Your ego is not typically. Your ego is associated more with day-to-day worldly concerns, survival, practical things like going to work, making money, getting a job, taking care of your family, not walking into traffic. typical day-to-day practical things. And what one needs to do is forge that link between the ego and the higher self or inner star, so that the ego understands what the higher self or the inner star wants, and so it can accomplish that, because they can be at odds with each other. For example, the ego might be like, oh man, I need to just work really hard every single day so I can make a certain amount of money. And your higher self might be like, no, man, you need more adventure in your life. You're very much out of balance. You need more adventure, or something like that. And so you can see that here there would be the ego is trying to go one way and the higher self is trying to go another way. And your ego is usually is what wins out, because that's the center of your field of consciousness. That's what you typically consider to be you. Okay. So the reason why that I'm bringing this up is because this is going to be key for the test that we take. And what I mean is, the whole point of everything that we are doing is to strengthen the link between our ego and inner star, and integrate all aspects of ourselves into unity, into wholeness, into what Carl Jung calls individuation. The Neo-Genian system would call it inner star actualization. So do you see? The inner star wants to move you to wholeness, which means integrating all the sefirot, integrating all of them, balancing and harmonizing all of them. That's what the inner star wants. And we do this first by establishing a link between the ego and the inner star, so that you can choose to do that. You need to have the choice and the volition and the will and the action to actually do it. Because your higher self, your inner star, is already trying to do that, but your ego can be in the way. You need to align your ego with the inner star to engage in the active integration. Okay, so the purpose, the point, is to become whole, integrated, and unified as an individual. Individuation. Because, by the way, the reason why Carl Jung calls it individuation is because before becoming individuated, we're fractured. Our psyche is full of different complexes and aspects of ourselves that are at war with each other. I just showed you how the ego and the inner star can be in conflict. All of these sefirot can be in conflict with each other. That's a very simplistic model. You have your entire psyche is kind of fighting with itself. Each aspect is like its own personality that wants something, and they're at odds with each other. The inner star is trying to organize everything, but your ego is what ultimately makes the decisions around here. So you need to have your ego aligned with your inner star for the purpose of integrating all of these things. So and I know I may be over explaining this, and apologies if I am, but it's because this is really important to understand. And so just one more time, the inner star we represent at the top of the tree as Keter, but it's actually the entire tree, because it's the totality of you. It's everything that you are. Its purpose is unity, to bring and integrate all the sefirot together. And in order to do this, you need to forge a link between your ego and the inner star, which is represented by the ego inner star axis. Okay, so with that in mind, and why do this? Because the more actualized you become, the more that you're able to have the life that you want to have and attain purpose and meaning and value. You're leveling up. You're going up grades of consciousness, literally. That's what the tree can also represent, by the way, scales of consciousness. Okay, so that's what we're doing. By the way, a nice visualization that you can do to kind of just embed in the psyche that you're willfully, intentfully wanting to forge that connection between your higher self is you can imagine a glowing white sphere of light in your forehead, where the third eye may be. And then in your chest, a glowing yellow sun, representing Tiferet, or the ego. And then that axis connecting Keter to Tiferet, or the inner star to the ego. It can be just a nice visualization to help you remember and keep you on point from time to time. Okay, but I digress a little bit. So now that we have what we're trying to do in mind, how do we do this? So this is where the soul signature test comes in. Let's see. So I know we're using a lot of diagrams. This is what we're going to do. If you take a look at this diagram, all of this it's this. It's just greatly simplified. We've simplified it and broken it down. But you can see here we have sensing, here we have sensing, here we have intuition, here we have intuition. Here we have thinking, here we have thinking, here we have feeling, here we have feeling, here we have will, here we have will, here we have care, here we have care, here we have reason, here we have reason, here we have experience. And so basically what we're representing here in just very, very basic form is how the different sefirot are associated and linked. We've broken them up into pairs. Do you see there's a pair here, there's a pair here, there's a pair here, there's a pair here, and there's a pair here. So we've simplified it down. Now, the only thing, we did change one thing. The only thing that we did differently is that we've labeled this as introvert and this as extrovert. And why we've done that will become apparent in a moment. But this is essentially the same thing as this, just greatly simplified so you can easily see how these are paired up. What we're going to do now, I know there's a lot of diagrams in this one, but all we're doing now with this, we have just taken the center pillar and moved it to the side. Okay, that's all we did. We took what was in the center and we moved it to the side. Why did we do that? Just so that we can see everything easier and more clearly. So that's what we've done here. We've moved this, the central pillar, we've just moved to the side. Okay, so what we're going to do now is use this as a key to discover our soul signature. Let's see where to put some of these papers. There's a lot of papers we're using today. So basically, we're going to do something like this. What I want you to do is, or what we're going to do is, like I said, everything we have on pairs. And the first one is the introvert-extrovert pair. Have you ever seen those tests on Instagram? They're real simple and kind of silly. And it usually has two elements and then a line in between. And it says like, oh, do you prefer coffee or tea? Do you prefer mornings or nights? Do you prefer wine or beer? Or whatever. And then you usually mark on the little line between them where, you know, maybe you like mornings more than nights, but not that much. So it'll go, you know what I mean? You mark what represents what you prefer on that. We're going to do the same thing here. If you want to quickly just draw this out, because it's real simple to draw. They're just a couple circles in a line. You could do this right now if you want. And if you have some paper and pen, I actually recommend that you do. Like I said, when I make the PDFs available, I'll make all of these handouts available for you. But in the meantime, if you just want to draw a couple of quick circles, I recommend that you do, because like I said, this is really important. So And you'll see why as we continue. And remember, this is important stuff. I know that it's not as exciting as talking about aliens invading Earth or something like that, like a lot of, channels may do. But this is the stuff that's actually going to begin to get you to reach higher levels of consciousness and get the life that you want through understanding how to give form to what you will. All right, so it's important stuff. So let's get to here. So we're going to start with this, which is introvert and extrovert. And just pretend like you're taking one of those tests that you would take on Instagram. So what is introversion and extroversion? Just real quick, let me give you an explanation, because some people typically think like, oh, it's shy versus outgoing. It can be related to that, but not always. Introverted people, so introversion versus extroversion is where you direct your energy, how energy flows. That's what introversion versus extroversion is. So introverted people recharge by spending time alone and often tune their attention inwards towards their inner thoughts, feelings, and ideas. They're very comfortable reflecting deeply, spending time alone, and being in quiet environments. They can often find social interactions very draining. Now, extroversion, the energy is directed outwards. Individuals gain energy from being around others and with engaging with the external world. They usually like active, lively settings, enjoy meeting new people, and typically extroverts feel energized after socializing. So what I want you to do is ask yourself, where do you fall on this? How much of an introvert versus how much of an extrovert are you? Where do you fall? And you can ask yourself, so for example, after a long day, do you feel energized by spending quiet time alone or by interacting with others? When you face challenges, do you usually go internally and reflect inwardly and give it a lot of thought? Or do you usually tend to more right away look for input and support from others? Would you rather spend your time at a social setting, a lively event, or at home reading or engaging with personal hobbies? So ask yourself these questions. Now, all of us very few of us are all introvert or all extrovert. Most of us have a certain degree of one more than the other. So this is why what you're going to do is mark where you think you fall. Of course, right in the middle would be ambivert. Exactly in the middle would be ambivert. But just mark where you think you would lie. Okay. Now I will say, kind of try not to go directly in the middle. If you with the different pairs that we go through today, if you genuinely do fall somewhere in the middle, if you actually do, yes, put it there. But try to lean towards one or the other, because it's going to be, you're going to get a lot more use out of this if you do. Okay. So do that right now. If you have a piece of paper, figure out where you lie on this introvert extrovert scale. And once you do that, we are going to move on to intuition and sensing. So introvert and extrovert, it's where you direct your energy. Intuition versus sensing is, where does your information primarily come from? So intuitive people, they usually rely on abstract patterns and making connections and possibilities. They like ideas, imagination, interpreting symbolic meanings. They usually trust intuitive feelings and instincts, and they like to look beyond surface details into like a bigger picture or hidden worlds. They're drawn to like underlying meanings and overarching themes. They tend to be very imaginative and visionary. Sensing, on the other hand, relies on concrete, practical information. It comes from the five senses. This is about the five senses. That's what this is about, the five senses. And people who are sensors, they're very tuned in to their immediate reality, specific details, tangible facts. They like things that are very clear, straightforward, and practical. And so remember that this is about where does the information come from? And so think about this. Are you more drawn to exploring imaginative possibilities? Or do you stick to like practical, tried and true methods? Do you like abstract concepts and ideas, or more like concrete and practical matters? So consider that. And mark somewhere where you think that you may fall. I'm just marking these kind of randomly, by the way. I'm not saying this is how I identify. I'm just marking them randomly as an example. So if you lean more towards sensing, put it closer to sensing. If you move more towards, just put it where you think you fall. So this is where you direct energy. This is where you gather information. Does your information come from the sensory world or from your intuition? Where does info come from for you? The sensory world or your intuition, your inner world? So after that, next we are going to move on to another pair. And this particular pair is, of course, thinking and feeling. Now, thinking and feeling is how you make decisions and evaluate information. And I want you to also notice how this is all connected. Where you direct your energy, how you receive information, how you evaluate the information you receive. So you got your information from senses or intuition or a combination therein. So now that you got the information, what do you think about it? Or how do you feel about it? You see a difference? Like you find something out. Oh my God, I don't know. You lost all this money. What do you think about that? Logically speaking, like, oh no, now I have to figure out how I'm going to pay the rent and get a job and blah, blah, blah. Or how do you feel about that? Oh, I feel really sad and distraught. I might need therapy, etc. Two very different ways of evaluating information and making decisions. Are you going to go with thinking and prioritize, oh, I need to go out and get a job and make more money? Or are you going to prioritize your feelings? Oh no, I'm really distraught. I need to put that on hold. Maybe ask someone to lend me some money so I can get therapy first, whatever. You see, very, very different ways of approaching this information. So thinking versus feeling, how we evaluate information. Thinking individuals prioritize logic, objectivity, and reason, analyzing things rationally, considering pros and cons, making decisions based on reason, logic, fairness, practicality as well. And then feeling prioritizes personal values. It prioritizes emotions. This is about assessing situations based on compassion, empathy, relationships, their impact on others. And so decisions with feeling types are often focused on maintaining relationships and aligning with like personal values and ethical considerations. So I gave this example before. Let's say that you hire a plumber and the plumber comes over and does a terrible job. Logically speaking, if you're a thinker, you go, okay, I'm going to go online, look up Yelp reviews and find the best plumber. Does Yelp even do plumbers, or is that just food? I don't know. If Yelp is just food, maybe don't look for a plumber there. I hope you wouldn't find one there if that's the case. But you get ready. Logically speaking, hey, I need to hire someone who's better, so I'm going to look up reviews, hire a better person. That's what a thinking person would assess that situation. A feeler might be different. Like, oh, maybe he seemed kind of upset. Maybe he's having a really bad day. I'm going to, let him know my concerns and how I feel about it, and give him another chance, because maybe he's having a bad day and we all need second chances or whatever. See, very different. And I'm not saying one is better than the other, by the way. It's just different ways of approaching things. So consider things like that. When making important decisions, do you rely on logical analysis, objective reasoning, or more about like personal feelings and values? Do you like to create emotional harmony and understanding, or do you like to engage in more like logical, rational, when you talk with your friends, is it more like logical, rational conversations, or is it more feeling entering conversations? Do you trust data and logic more, or do you tend to go with your emotions and instincts? So again, wherever that you think that you fall, on here, make a mark. So next we have will and care. So will and care, this pair is about your personal approach to, work ethic and life balance. That's what will and care is associated with. Work ethic and life balance. So people associated with will, this is about discipline, structure, self-control. This is about setting strict goals, values, routines, and pushing yourself to achieve tasks, even at the cost of personal comfort. So this is someone who just puts their nose to the grindstone, gets on a super strict diet, works all day long because they want to achieve their goals no matter what. Very disciplined. This center, located here, associated with care, are those who not only value like empathy and compassion, but also self-care and nurturing. This is focusing on emotional health, kindness to yourself, maintaining flexibility and prioritizing self-care over rigid structures. So think about where you fall with this. Do you naturally prefer structured discipline with clear boundaries? Or do you prefer something that's more flexible with self-care and emotional priority? Now, are you typically strict and controlled, or more self-nurturing? Now, here's a really good question to ask yourself, and I think that this one is really telling. When you have free time, are you more likely to fill it with something that you think is productive or relaxation? That's another good one. Remember, we're all going to have varying degrees of these things. So let's say you select where you fall on this, a little more towards care. So finally, we're going to go up to here, to this pair at the top. Now, this pair at the top is how you connect, essentially how you connect to the divine, how you understand concepts like reality, the soul, divinity, transcendent concepts. This pair is part of the supernal triad. So it's a very high pair. So I'm going to explain what they mean and how to select one. But here's the thing. Some people might not be at a place where either of these apply to them. Some people don't have an understanding of the divine or their higher self, And if you don't yet, that's okay. That's perfectly fine. If when I explain this to you, you're kind of like, I don't really know what you mean, that's totally fine and that's okay. And if that's the case, don't put a mark on this one. If that's the case, don't put a mark on this one. It's important to be honest because the whole point of all this is going to see then how to use this to be able to reach higher states of consciousness and awareness. So this is how you approach the divine, the higher self, the transcendent. People who connect through reason, structured thinking, analysis, and rational thought would fall under here. And I don't just mean because wasn't that down here in thinking? This is related to practical matters. Like, the plumber broke my toilet. What should I do? Or how do I feel about it? Up here, you're not thinking about the plumber that broke your toilet. You're thinking, what is existence? What is the primary essence of reality? How is existence structured? What are we? Where are we? Why are we here? What am I? See the difference? It's much different. It's on a much higher level. And so if you're someone who understands it through high-level philosophy, rational thought, mathematics, clear logical frameworks, carefully reasoned conclusions, that would, of course, fall towards this sphere. But conversely, we have people who understand it through experience, which means, what does that mean? Like altered states of consciousness, direct experiential encounters with profound reality. You know, someone who would fall under reason, you can think of a highly intelligent philosopher contemplating reality and coming up with these theories. But someone who's an experiencer, this is more like doing a psychedelic trip or engaging in meditation. It's about personal transformative experiences, not abstract logic. And remember, every time I mention psychedelics, I just have to say, don't do anything dangerous or illegal. Be safe and smart. And remember, you don't have to do those things. You don't have to. You can engage in altered states of consciousness and experience through things like meditation and other practices, okay? So think about that. When you are approaching the divine in your understanding of the divine, where do you lie in between the poles of reason and experience? And remember, if this is one like, well, I don't know, I've never really thought about that, or I've never really experienced something like that, or tried to experience something like that, then just don't put a mark on this one. That's totally fine to do. Okay? So you know, again, just ask yourself, do you prefer, when contemplating deeper meanings of life, intellectual study, logical exploration, or do you prefer more like direct transformative experiences? Okay. So, I don't know, let's throw it over here. Okay. All right. So now what we're going to do, hopefully you have a paper and you have marked these down. If not, that's fine. You don't have to do it right now. You can do it later. But now that we've done this, we're going to take the next step here. And here's the next step. Now that you've done this, what I want you to do is fill in the sphere that the mark that you made comes the closest to. So this one comes closer to introvert. So you fill that in. This one comes closest to sensing. So you fill that in. This one comes closest to thinking. So you fill that in. This one comes closest to care. So you fill that in. This one comes closest to reason. So you fill that in. Remember, if you were directly in the center, fill them both in, but try not to do that. Try to pick one over the other. Unless you really think that you're smack dab in the middle. Most of us aren't. Most of them. But some are. There are some. I've met a few people like that. So, and when it comes to the top one, if you didn't really know, then don't fill either of them in. Okay? So fill those in like that. Then what we're going to do is, just to get a better picture here, let's go back to just draw yourself a tree of life. It's real easy to draw a tree of life. So just draw yourself a tree of life and then just do the same thing. So here, this would be filled in. And then down here, this one would be filled in. And then thinking would be filled in. And then care would be filled in. And then reason would be filled in. All right. And you can do it on, oh, that was out of frame. Okay. So you could do it in a real simple one like this, or you could print out a fancy one and just do the same thing. Right? If we were to, do it here, it'd be here and here and here, here, and here. You get the idea. All right. But now that we've done this, what does this represent? What is this? Why did we do this? And why does it matter? This that you've set up is going to be key for your personal journey and growth and transformation. Because remember that the whole goal of this is to become whole and integrated. So what we have just done by marking this is that all the areas that you have filled in, that represents your ego self. Okay? That represents your ego self. Now, one more, again, you might be wondering, well, wait, I thought ego was in the center. Yes, we represent ego being in the center in this model here. But remember that the inner star is represented up here, but it's the entire thing. Well, the ego manifests as working with different aspects of your psyche. So you could think of it like clustering around your ego, if you want to think about it this way. This is just a representation of your ego self. Now, why is this important? So again, I recommend, doing this on an actual tree of life as well. There's a couple reasons why this is going to be incredibly important here. First of all, and we're going to be using this throughout our study of Kabbalah, because this has to connect with you personally, and we're all different. And so we're each going to have a unique signature here. Now, one of the dangers of working with the tree of life and Kabbalah is something known as ego inflation. And that is because we're setting up a symbolic system to work with and to connect with our unconscious and all kinds of, we're setting up a symbolic system within ourselves. However, we have to be careful that it doesn't turn into ego inflation, because what a person tends to do is focus on the aspects of the tree that they relate to. Like, oh yeah, I really relate to, thinking, and I really relate to willpower, and I really relate to discipline, and they focus with the different archetypes associated with that, whether the different god names or archangels or whatever. They just get really into the parts that they resonate with, and that makes sense. You resonate with it, so you're drawn to it. But what that tends to do is amplify the ego, because if you are just constantly engaged in work, practical work, ritual, ceremony, and actual rational action and analysis only with the ones that you are resonate with, you're just amplifying your egoic structure. Now, it doesn't mean you should never work on those things, but if that's all, that's one of the dangers, and this is how to avoid it, because now you can clearly map out your egoic structure and understand where those are, so you can catch yourself if you start to become too imbalanced. So this, what we could call the inner star key, represents your ego. But remember, we want to know the ego, we want to know the shadow self, we want to know the mirror self, and we want to know the power self. Here's why this is so awesome. Because you're going to be able to discover your power self, or I'm sorry, not your power self, your shadow self. Remember, it's like, oh, well, shadow self is here, right? Yes, that's how we were represented on this. But for you personally, how we're going to see how the shadow self affects your psyche is that your shadow self is going to be the shadow versions of your ego self. So the shadow versions of all of these are going to be your shadow self. Now, this is going to involve exploring the tree of death and the klipo, because the tree of death and the klipo is the shadow of the tree and the shadow of each of these spheres, each of the sephirot. So we're not going to explore that too much today because we have to get into the tree of death and all that. But do you see so far what we have modeled here is in this diagram, we now have the ego modeled and we have the shadow modeled as well as the adverse forms, shadow forms of these. So we've mapped out the ego, we've mapped out the shadow self. Now we move on to mapping out the mirror self. What is the mirror self? The mirror self is your inner opposite. It's the aspect of you that is the opposite of your ego self. So you probably see where this is going. The opposite of your ego self, or the mirror self, are the aspects that you haven't filled in. So while this is your ego and your shadow, your mirror self are these aspects here. And why is this important? Because remember why we're doing this, to forge a connection to our inner star and achieve unity and wholeness and balance. Well, we're not going to achieve unity, wholeness, and balance until we have all aspects of ourselves integrated, meaning integrating our shadow self, the adverse sides of the ego, and the mirror self, the opposite sides as well. And so you can use this as a reminder and as a guide to remind you on the things that you need to work on in terms of the shadow or the mirror self. So let's take the mirror self, for example. Let me bring up some of my notes here. So someone who, let me just bring up my notes. Those are my notes. All right. So someone who has someone who has the setup that we have as an example here. Remember, I just more or less did this randomly. So someone who has a setup that's like this, if they want to work on their mirror self, they can know exactly how to do it. So if we start with here, the mirror self would be extrovert. And so cultivating extroversion would mean like joining clubs, joining groups, going to classes, meeting new people, being socially active, engaging, going outside your comfort zone and engaging with people outside of your circle. That's what someone working on their mirror self would do here. And then here is their mirror self would also involve intuition. This would be about cultivating insight, creative writing, art, music, maybe even connecting with your intuition with understanding tarot cards, understanding how to connect unrelated ideas, exploring possibilities instead of focusing on, immediate details. Someone who is this represents them, then their mirror self would also be feeling. And of course, this would be enhancing emotional awareness, empathy. You could keep a journal to reflect on, express your emotions, sit with yourself and feel your emotions, practice imagining yourself in someone else's shoes to cultivate empathy. Really think about how people are affected in different situations, etc. Up here, this would, of course, mean being more disciplined. And being more disciplined would involve creating things like a clear, daily, consistent routine, building a structure, disciplined habits, creating clear, measurable goals, tracking your progress, challenging yourself. And then up here, experience would, of course, deal with engaging in altered states of consciousness, meditation, exploring new experiences. Now, of course, this would involve altered states like psychedelics, if that's something you want to do. Remember, you don't have to do that. Engaging in things like meditation or being mindfulness and experiencing the unity of existence while sitting in the center of a meadow or something like that. You get the idea. And then so you can map out exactly what it is that you need to consciously work on. Now, of course, as well, that's the rational aspect of it. You could also do rituals to engage your unconscious mind, which each of those aspects that you need as well. And we'll talk about that in the future. We're going to talk about rituals, how to do rituals too. But now you know where to focus, because if you don't have this, you might just keep focusing on your egoic properties and then just amplify your ego rather than becoming balanced and whole, which is the whole point. Do you see how already we're kind of starting to come in line with our inner star? What does the ego want? More of what's familiar, more of what's stable, more of me. The inner star says, no, focusing on the stuff that's missing, focus on what's missing. And this is showing us what is missing. Just real quick, I'll give you some brief examples for those who might be taking notes for the ones that we didn't mention. So so I know this is filled in, but I'm just saying, I'm just going to give a list for all of them because I don't know what you guys have selected. So some of you may have these empty. So I want to give you some ideas of things that you can do to cultivate all of these. So for introversion, you could set aside daily quiet time to journal, contemplate, engage in more solo activities like reading, walking in nature, engaging in projects that require, internal thought, unplugging from technology, and just creating a space to be alone and introspective. Down here, what would this be? This is sensing. So cultivating sensing would be practicing like being in the moment, staying grounded, focusing your attention clearly on your senses and your environment. Engage in practical tasks like gardening, cooking, crafting, building. Notice the sensory details while you do those things. Deliberately observe and describe your surroundings in detail to enhance your awareness and sensory precision. Someone with thinking needs to develop thinking. Engage with nonfiction like philosophy or logic puzzles. Practice decision-making by listing logical pros and cons before making a decision. Engage in rational conversations and talk about ideas and views. You can sharpen your logical and rational critical thinking skills. Maybe take a philosophy class or something like this. When it comes to care, this would involve self-care. Prioritize self-care. Take a vacation. Rest. Relax. I neglect this one quite a lot. I need a goddamn vacation. I work too much. So yeah, take self-care, vacations, relaxation, making sure that you don't burn yourself out with too much gevura. Make sure you are taking self-care. And then of course up here, this would have to do with understanding existence in a rational way. This would be like high level philosophy and understanding the structure of reality. Here we're talking about like Hegelian idealism or mathematics, or the best, meta-rationalism and neogenesis. Meta-rationalism and neogenesis would give you everything you need for this one here. So I just wanted to go real quick over the different practices that one could do for those particular areas. Like I said, I will be giving a list. I'll be putting together a PDF for members to be able to freely download that's going to have all of this stuff listed out. So finally, now we have to talk about the power self. So what is the power self? We talked about the ego. We talked about the inner star. We talked about the shadow. We talked about the mirror. Okay, so what about the power self? The power self, so as always, it's you know, we represent it here, but how it actually manifests, how the power self is going to manifest is actually all the paths between these, and not only the ones we have listed, but just actually like all the paths. The power self is all the paths. And these paths are what represents the flow of energy. It represents the flow of energy. And that's what your power self essentially is. Remember, for those who don't recall, your power self is regarding your true purpose and your meaning and the strive to go beyond human. We've talked in alchemy, we talked a little bit about how to discover your power self through power self projection. But as we work on so basically working with the different paths is what's ultimately going to enable you to grow to a point where your power self starts to become uncovered and revealed through working with the paths. We haven't talked about working with the paths yet. But remember, the power self also involves the shadow as well. So it involves the shadow as well. So when we get to the tree of death, there are the tunnels. So not only are there the paths, but there's also the tunnels. So integrating your shadow self or your power self means exploring and integrating the 22 paths and the 22 tunnels. And so we haven't talked about the paths or the tunnels yet. So we can't talk too much about it here. But remember, I said that this key is going to be something that we're going to refer to throughout. So make sure that you make this for yourself, because when we get to these different areas, you're going to need to be able to refer to it. But what I really want you to notice is really the power of this model here. The entire tree, that's your inner star, that's your psyche. What we've labeled and discovered is our ego self. The adverse being our shadow self. The opposite, or what's missing, being our mirror self. And the flow of energy in the 22 paths as being the power self. And we didn't talk much about the shadow because that requires the tree of death. We talked a bit about the mirror self and how to integrate the mirror self and use that as a reminder. So you can see how that you can use that practically right now to begin integrating your mirror self. Shadow self and power self, we have to wait a little while to discuss more. But you can see already how this is an incredibly important and powerful diagram and model. And this is what I mean by your soul signature. This is the inner star key. This is the key that's going to allow you in your journey, in your personal and unique journey. Now, one other thing that I want to mention here is some of you probably thought of this already. And you're like, how accurate is this? Is this really that accurate? And so here's the thing, is that maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but ultimately it doesn't really matter too much, because what matters is starting to do something. And a lot of people get the tree, you know, when most people have like the tree of life, they're like, what even is this? what do these different cephalo or spheres mean? Why am I memorizing this stuff? Why am I studying this stuff? How do I connect with my higher self? How do I connect with my ego? What's my shadow self? This is a good place to start. This is a pretty darn good place to start. And it's going to give you a way to begin engaging with it in a real, practical, meaningful way. And that's the important, there's no use doing any of this stuff if it's not engaged in a real, practical, and meaningful way. So that's why we do this. Even if it's not 100% accurate, that's fine. It doesn't matter. And even when we explore the shadow, does it mean that all your shadow is going to be here, here, and here, and none in these? No, that doesn't mean that at all. But it's a good place to start, to get the wheels turning, to get the ball rolling, to begin to, because all of this is an exploration of yourself. And here is like a quick and dirty way to map it out. It might change. You might come to different conclusions. You might realize other aspects, and that's totally fine. But this is a way to, get the ball rolling, like I said, and it's a very powerful way to get the ball rolling. I mean, just look how much we have illustrated in just a single diagram, and how we see the interactions between all these in just a single diagram. I mean, here you have the inner star, the ego, the shadow, the power self, the mirror self, all of it, and in a unique, personalized way as well. This is, I try not to emphasize it. It's important. It's very important, very key. And one other thing that I want to mention as well is that when it comes, because these are all pairs of opposites essentially. So one thing that I want to mention is that it's not that one is good and one is bad. Because you're a thinker, it doesn't mean like, oh, well, by cultivating feeling, it means all your feelings must be, or all your decisions have to be emotional now. No. So ultimately what you want to do is cultivate all this so the whole darn tree is filled in. You want the whole darn tree to be filled in. That's how you achieve unity, when the whole darn tree is filled in. But what that does not necessarily mean, okay, so take thinking and feeling, for example. Because you are lacking in feeling, it doesn't mean that all your decisions must be feeling based from now on. And also, let's say that you do begin to cultivate it. Balance doesn't mean 50-50. What I mean by that is, it doesn't mean like, oh, half the time I'm going to be logical and half the time I'm going to be feeling based. Or in every decision, I'm going to be 50% logical and 50% emotional. In every decision, 50% logical. No, that's not what that means at all. It means having the ability to have cultivated both so you can pick which one to use in the appropriate context. There are some contexts where you should use logic over feelings. And there are certain contexts where you should use emotion and empathy over logic. And there are many where you'll need a blend of both. So I want to make that clear. By balancing and integration doesn't mean 50-50. It means having the ability, because you've cultivated all these, to access and select the faculty that is appropriate for the context. Think of it like if you learned English and Spanish. If you learn English and Spanish, you're not going to half the time speak English and half the time speak Spanish. You're going to speak English when you're trying to communicate to English speaking people, and you're going to choose to use Spanish when you're trying to, communicate with people who speak Spanish. It would be really silly if you were doing half English and half Spanish all the time, or this is not a perfect metaphor, but you see what I mean? If you cultivated both languages, you can use them in the appropriate context to be most effective. That's what this is about. It's not about 50-50 or one over the other or whatever. It's about total cultivation of all so that you have the power to select from all of these. And this is ultimately what's going to really facilitate your growth and stepping into your power. Power self is associated by all the paths in between and the tunnels in between, and actualizing your whole self, your inner star, connecting to it, and individuating in Jungian terms. So, like I said, I will be providing downloads of all this for members. It might take me a second to get to it, but I will, so that you can have all this listed. If do this if you haven't done this test already, watch this video again, get a piece of paper and do this test and figure out what your soul signature is, because this is going to be the inner star key for a lot of following lessons. Now that we have that, what we are going to be exploring next week, most likely, will be the 22 paths. And guess what? That's going to include learning tarot. Why? Because each of the 22 paths are associated with the 22 major arcana of the tarot. And so we're going to use them as symbolic ways to understand how energy flows through the tree. That's most likely. So the 22 paths and the tarot is most likely what we will be learning next week as we begin connecting all of this stuff together. And then eventually we'll get into the tree of death, where we can finally start to really explore our shadow self, and then the 22 tunnels, integrate, connect with our power self through the paths and the tunnels, and strive towards unity and wholeness and inner star actualization. So what I'd like from you guys, as always, please let me know in the comments if this was clear or if there are parts that are confusing. Because as I always tell you guys, I think about this stuff every day. And so sometimes it's hard for me to know what's complicated and what's easy to understand. So if there are some parts that that aren't quite clicking and you don't know why or why a certain thing is the way it is, please feel free to ask your questions in the comments. Let me know. It helps me know what to discuss in future videos. And so, hey, as always, if you enjoy my work, hey, become a member. We're having a members only video right after this. Today's members only video is the Bible has a major problem and Christians are ignoring it. That's what we're going to be talking about. It's going to be really good. And you get access to, like I said, all my PDF downloads. I have a whole folder all on alchemy and inner transformation, totally free for members. I'm going to release a will forming ritual on manifestation next week for members. And so that's great, and it helps out the channel a lot. And make sure you check out my books. If you like what we talk about today, really, this is the one to get. This is going to have the ego self, the shadow self, the mirror self, the power self, the inner star. That is all described in here, not in terms of the tree of life and Kabbalah, but in terms of analytically. So I recommend this one. And again, follow me on Spotify. You can follow me on Spotify. Links in the description of this video. It helps out when you do that. And a big shout out to everyone who supports, especially Renaissance Fairy, Cassidy, Angela, DB, Nusalina, Vuanli, Celsus, Chris Magistus, TDFD, and everyone else. Thank you very much.